You've been quiet for so long that people forgot you were capable of becoming dangerous, and somewhere inside you that truth hurts more than you ever admit, because you know you've spent years shrinking yourself, softening your edges, lowering your voice, negotiating your worth, apologizing for existing, and pretending you didn't notice the way people took advantage of your patience, your kindness, your silence. You know how many times you betrayed your own boundaries just to keep the peace. How many times you allowed someone to speak over you, disrespect you, dismiss you, and still you stayed, thinking maybe they would one day see the depth you were offering. But they never did, and that pain, the quiet kind, the unspoken kind, the kind people never see, became the weight you carried alone. You don't talk about how tired you are, not physically, emotionally. The fatigue that comes from holding yourself together in front of people who never bothered to understand what it costs you to stay calm. The exhaustion of pretending you don't feel the sting of manipulation, the slow erosion of your confidence, the way someone's words linger in your mind long after they've forgotten what they said. You don't tell anyone how often you replay conversations at night, wondering if you were too sensitive, too forgiving, too blind to the truth that was always right in front of you. And that truth is this: people grew comfortable because you made it easy for them to underestimate you. You gave too much, you stayed too long, you tolerated too deeply, and somewhere along the way they convinced you that your softness was weakness, that your empathy was naivety, that your silence meant you had no power. But the part of you that's waking up now, the part you kept buried under guilt, shame, fear, and attachment, is beginning to understand something darker, sharper, stronger. You're realizing that the very things they mistook for vulnerability were actually signs of a mind far more controlled than theirs. This is where dark psychology quietly enters your life, not through manipulation, but through awareness, through the painful realization that human behavior is shaped by invisible forces most people never recognize. The truth is that manipulation doesn't always look like shouting or threats. Sometimes it looks like subtle guilt. Sometimes it sounds like, "I didn't mean it like that." Sometimes it feels like a shift in tone, a withdrawal of affection, a cold silence designed to make you question yourself. And you did. For a long time you blamed yourself for things you didn't cause. You accepted responsibility for emotions that weren't yours. You apologized to avoid conflict. You absorbed their moods like it was your job. That's how emotional conditioning works. It teaches you to anticipate someone else's reaction before you even think about your own. It trains you to shrink. It turns you into the version of yourself that causes the least trouble. And slowly, without even noticing it, you become someone who is afraid to speak their truth because they've been punished for it too many times. That's how trauma bonding forms, not because you love the person hurting you, but because your nervous system associates their attention, even negative attention, with emotional survival. You stay because leaving feels like ripping away a part of yourself. You stay because the mind hates losing what it has been conditioned to depend on. But here's the part people rarely talk about. The moment you start to focus, the moment you turn inward, the moment you step back from the noise, everything changes. Focus is not just productivity. Focus is self-respect. Focus is emotional clarity. Focus is reclaiming the parts of yourself that were scattered, manipulated, dismissed, or broken. When you focus, you stop reacting to manipulation, you stop feeding toxic relationships, you stop participating in the cycles that were designed to keep you small. People fear that kind of focus, not because you become aggressive, but because you become untouchable. When you stop explaining yourself, manipulative people lose their leverage. When you stop arguing, toxic people lose their control. When you stop needing validation, emotionally abusive people lose their ability to shape your self-worth. Your silence becomes power, not submission. Your distance becomes clarity, not abandonment. Your calm becomes a weapon, one sharpened by pain, awareness, and emotional maturity. This is what Machiavelli understood. The most powerful people are not loud, they are not chaotic, they are not desperate for attention. The most powerful people are quietly strategic, emotionally detached from manipulation, and deeply focused on what cannot be taken from them, their self-control. Focus is the path to power because it restores your ability to choose your reactions, to choose your connections, to choose who has access to your emotions. And the moment you take back that choice, you become a threat to anyone who benefited from your uncertainty. You've spent years thinking your empathy was a weakness, but empathy without boundaries is self-destruction. Empathy with boundaries is strength, and boundaries are what toxic people fear most because boundaries expose the truth. They reveal who cared about you and who cared about controlling you. They reveal who valued you and who valued what you offered them. When you start enforcing those boundaries calmly, quietly, consistently, you will notice something eerie. People who once acted superior begin to shift. They get uncomfortable. They get reactive. They accuse you of changing. They say you're acting distant, cold, selfish. But what they're really saying is this: I can't manipulate you anymore. Your focus threatens the entire structure of their control. That's why so many people want you distracted. That's why they interrupt your healing, your goals, your growth. Because a focused mind sees everything clearly. It sees the red flags. It sees the inconsistencies. It sees the emotional abuse disguised as jokes, the passive-aggressive comments, the guilt-tripping, the subtle mind games. When you're focused, you stop giving people the benefit of the doubt when they've already shown you who they are. You stop making excuses for behavior that would never be acceptable if you truly valued yourself. And this is where the transformation begins. Not in sudden confidence, not in external victories, but in the quiet moment you decide you're done abandoning yourself. When you decide to stop chasing people who don't deserve you, when you stop explaining your worth, when you stop justifying your boundaries, when you stop apologizing for expecting respect, this is the moment you become powerful. Not in a dark, manipulative way, but in the way Machiavelli meant power, the ability to remain unmoved by the chaos around you. Let the world misunderstand you. Let people call you distant. Let them call you cold. Let them say you've changed. Growth always looks like distance to those who preferred you small. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them lose access. You're not doing this to prove anything. You're doing it to protect the version of yourself you're building. The version that isn't controlled by guilt. The version that doesn't accept emotional crumbs. The version that understands the psychology of manipulation and refuses to participate in it anymore. The version that focuses so deeply that you begin to rebuild the self, worth that was slowly taken from you. Because the truth is, you were never weak, you were never naive, you were never powerless. You were simply emotionally generous in a world full of people who take advantage of generosity. You cared deeply in a world that profits from indifference. You loved with sincerity in a world that hides behind games. And now you're learning the balance. You're learning the difference between connection and attachment, between loyalty and self-sacrifice, between empathy and self-betrayal. You're learning how to protect your heart without closing it, how to trust without losing yourself, how to give without disappearing. That is power, that is control, that is focus. And when you master that focus, when you turn it inward, when you use it to understand your own patterns, your wounds, your triggers, your strengths, no one can touch you. Not their opinions, not their manipulation, not their guilt, not their silence, not their pressure. You become someone who cannot be emotionally controlled because you finally understand your own psychology. You understand how dark psychology works, not to harm others, but to heal yourself. You understand how toxic relationships form and why you stayed. You understand why you were drawn to people who reflected your wounds, and that understanding frees you. So breathe slow, deep, calm. You are not behind, you are not broken, you are not weak for caring, you are learning, you are becoming, you are focusing, and you are rising into a version of yourself that will no longer tolerate the things that once destroyed you. One day, you will look back and understand why you needed this silence, this rebuilding, this shift in power. You will understand that the people who underestimated you were necessary, because without them, you would have never discovered what you're capable of when you focus with intention. And when that day comes, when you stand grounded, clear, unshaken, you will finally understand the truth that has been waiting for you all along. The moment you learned to focus was the moment you became untouchable.